Mark, will you join us, please? All right. Oh, I have a clicker. Can I advance my slides on here too? Ha! I can. Okay. Shout out to Taylor Swift. It's me. Hi. My job right now is to wake everybody up after that delightful meal. So I feel like a snake that's eaten a goat. And that means I am very full of food and want a nap. So what we're going to do instead is we are going to do essentially a live version of The Agronomist. So as you heard, and as I'll explain in a moment, what The Agronomist is, and then we're going to do it live. So usually it's 2 guests, 1 topic, and away we go. But first, tomorrow is Canada's Ag Day. Does everybody know this? Maybe you didn't. Well, now you know. And the first thing we're going to do is do a video. And I'll tell you why. Because with Real Agriculture, we're of course across social media, and my social coordinator said, I need a video. So we are gonna do a Happy Canada's Ag Day on the count of 3, okay? Hang on a second. Everybody ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy Canada's Ag Day! Thanks, everybody. Okay. Mischief managed. Moving on. That'll be on social tomorrow. Alrighty, so this is me. I started in print. I'm originally from Western Canada, so I'm a recovering prairieite. I do farm just west of Ottawa, within the city limits, so that brings with it all sorts of challenges, but also opportunities. I absolutely love sharing what farmers are doing, the information that farmers need. I love livestock. I love raising livestock, even though, yes, like Markus, I'm smart and have sheep. I don't know how smart that is some years. But also, I am fascinated by how we connect with our consumers. I'm fascinated by packaging and labeling and how we communicate what we do in agriculture to our consumers. And so I am often in a grocery store taking pictures, and I get asked not to quite a bit. But anyway, here's the important thing. Okay, so what is The Agronomist? So if any of you spend any time on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever it's called, or on our website, every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host The Agronomist. It's a 1-hour show, 2 guests, 1 topic, sometimes 3 guests, depends how generous I feel with my time. We share a couple video clips, a couple slides, and we cover 1 topic. Now, this topic, forage and forage opportunities and forage production, is near and dear to my heart. I'm usually only allowed to cover the topic once a year, and I say allowed in a loose sense, because of course, it is an agronomy show, and forages don't always get the respect they deserve, so I am very pleased we get to do this today. And I will also, in May, do another one live. So that's what it is. Here's the expectations. So there's some of my sheep grazing on a cover crop. We can talk about that later. But The Agronomist is a live show. Live audience, it doesn't get much more live than this. It also has a chat function. We don't have a chat function here, except for that, yes, we do. So I encourage you all, please ask questions as we go. If it sets off our guests at all, don't worry, guys, I got you. I'll just regroup and away we go. So please interrupt, put your hands up. We get all sorts of chats and questions that come in on the chat as we go, okay? So for today's conversation, it is truly a conversation. This isn't just a presentation. So as we go, if you have questions for our guests or questions for me or questions in general, please interrupt, ask questions, have fun. That's what we do. One of the really cool things, so I've been doing this a while now, working in media, and I will say one of the greatest things that we can do now is have these interactions in real time. And this show on Monday nights, we have a following of a core group of people from the Fraser Valley in BC, the East Coast, down in South America, and we have people that they meet at 8 p.m. on our show, and they chat and they check in with each other, and it's become part of their social fabric as well. So it's really cool to connect farmers from across Canada and even other parts of the world. So I brought the intro music. I don't know if it's going to work. We're going to give it a whirl. Let's see. Will it work? No? It did before. Oh, it worked. That's my favorite part. Okay, so let's get rolling. So we have here Mark and Markus. Now, we got a decent introduction, so thank you for that. But the first place I always start with is introducing our guests. And so if each of you, Markus, maybe I'll start with you on that side, give our audience a little look at what you do on your farm.
Okay, thanks, Lyndsey. As the introduction stated there earlier, we've got a mixed livestock farm, and things are pretty busy with the number of livestock that we do run. Our main focus nowadays with our marketing and income is direct-to-consumer marketing, and you know it's made our farm viable in that both my wife and I can stay home. We have no off-farm income, and having those livestock work together as a unit on the farm is what makes it work for us. And again, as the intro said, our basis of the operation is forage. So we certainly try to maximize everything we can there and reduce our cost of production, because that goes a long way with the numbers that we run.
Thank you, Markus. All right, Mark.
Thank you, everybody. My first thing I'm going to do is ask a question. Do I look like I'm 65?
No, you don't.
Sorry. I have to apologize. It's not Rachel's fault. I'm not a very IT person, and when I tried to send my bio to Rachel, it did not work the first time. So I ended up typing it on my phone and sending her just short forms. And the 65 number should have been when my dad retired at 65, not me. Sorry,
very
Rachel.
important.
Probably my fault as much as yours. Don't worry about it. Thanks anyway. Okay, so on our operation, basically in a nutshell, I do what I'm told now. Because my son has taken over the operation as of 2020. And bottom line is forage is the major component on our operation for making milk. And the more forage and the better forage that we can make, the more milk we can put in the tank, and the easier it is to pay the mortgage payment. We have done many things in my lifetime, in my career on the farm. We started with square bales, to round bales, silage round bales, and now we're on with the chopper wagon with chop feed in bunker silos and 10-foot bags. And all those stages, all the way along in my career, I always recognized the importance of having that feed taken off at the right time. And when I started 40 years ago, putting up 5,000 to 6,000 good square bales on a hay dryer to have good quality hay for the milk cows was a priority. And to get that done required not just having one square baler in our mind, we had two. We never traded the old one in. We always upgraded it and kept the old one for a backup, because that hay had to come off. And even as today with our chopper wagon, up until 2 years ago, the chopper wagon's only been 3 years. To get the good quality forage, we still had the round baler for a backup when the old chopper wagon would break down on us. So today, as of last year, we now have 2 chopper wagons. There's always a backup plan to make sure we get what we need in that bag to put the milk in the tank. And that's one thing that we always focused on. Going to the chopper wagon system did that, getting the quality, and also was a lot more cost effective with labor. Cut our man hours in half. We went from 3 full-time people trying to bale, gather, wrap, down to one guy on the tractor with a chopper wagon, bringing it in, dumping it, and going back out. So one guy could fill the bagger up, one guy could just haul it in. So that's where we are today with our operation, and it works good for our grass-fed milk program. Thank you.
You look great for 65. You really do. Okay, so we've hit on a couple of the topics that we want to tackle today. One of those, of course, is forage yield, getting production out of that forage, and timely harvest, of course. And so that's where we're going to start right now. We're going to start on that production management and that question of yield versus quality. Now, both of you work in different systems, but similar in some ways. Markus, you're grazing, multi-species grazing, which we'll also talk about later. How are you managing the yield versus quality question on pasture?
It's certainly running a pasture-based system makes it easier to get that timing right. If fields, for instance, if we've got a very wet spring, and typically with a wet spring, if it's warm enough, we'll have lots of growth. It certainly adds difficulty to get that forage off as stored forage, whether it be silage or as dry hay. If the problem comes about that we can't get something harvested, we can always put livestock in. It's not necessarily ideal, but at the home farm, or what I call the home farm, we have enough options there in terms of what's fenced in for the livestock, what's fenced in for the sheep versus just for the cattle, water sources. We have lots of options to deal with timely harvest. Specifically to stored feeds, it's definitely, like Mark said, it's definitely a must to get that forage off at the right time. I mean, there's always issues that come about that drag things out. Sometimes last year was a challenging year. Come July, it was pretty difficult to get anything done in a good amount of time. But still, there is that push to get it off, and you sacrifice family life, you sacrifice whatever to get that job done and make sure that quality's there. Because if the quality's not there, the livestock will not perform in those winter months when they're on that stored feed. I've heard it said before that if you take care of the livestock, they'll take care of you, and it goes the other way. If you don't take care of them in terms of the feed quality that you give them, they will fall behind, and then it makes it a lot more difficult to make that mortgage payment, to make the tractor payment, make whatever payments you need to do.
So Mark, in your system, you're a year like last year, so we had, where I was anyway, very dry May, and then it turned very wet. In super wet conditions, how important is it? How do you manage to get that quality that you're going to need to make milk, even when the weather maybe isn't really conducive to making good hay?
So the wet weather was a bonus for me because I had my first cut done before it came.
Lucky you.
So the grass was only yay high, so we did not get the yield off the first cut, but we got some what my son calls high test forage, which can be a problem too, because now we're mixing it with the low quality stuff that we got later on in the year. So basically, it's the luck of the draw, and it's just making your mind up when to jump on it. So when we look at harvesting grasses, there's that 9-day window. So you look at the last field, and you don't want it past the 9-day maturity stage. So that means you're going to be cutting the first stuff well before you think you should be by your logic from years ago. But it pays off. And where we learned what part of this was from two places. One, 12 years ago, my wife and I went to Switzerland, and I actually spent time going from farm to farm over there. And I drove a self-propelled chopper wagon that's only about that high, the size of a half-ton, because they're on the mountains. Right. Yeah. And listening to them and watching them, and this was the 1st of April, and they were getting ready. They were getting ready in April for the first part of May to start chopping their silage. Their lawns were green, everything was green, so it was just a matter of weeks before they started. The second thing we lucked out on, I hope I shut my phone off so it doesn't quack here, but the information highway is amazing. My son linked up with an old guy in Wisconsin on growing grasses. And through his knowledge, back and forth with Dustin, that's where we got to where we are today in 3 years. So I remember the first year we did it with a chopper wagon. We took soil samples, emailed the results down to this old guy just for a comment, and the comment was just well done. It's just very simple, straightforward. We did what he told us to do, and the results happened.
See what happens when you listen, guys? Okay. So, Markus, obviously you are putting up hay for the winter months. Unfortunately, we get winter for 6 months of the year. We need stored feed. But that quality question on pasture, I know that you do graze your cattle and your sheep. How do you make the call of when you go back in to a paddock?
So usually we're about 28 days, give or take. It obviously depends on the weather, how quickly that field or that grass will regrow. Because most of what we graze is it's 90% grasses. We do have some legume in there, but most of it is grasses. Further into the summer, we'll get some more white clover that comes through in those fields, but we typically deal with grasses. So ideally, we're into those fields every 28 days. And for instance, if the cattle are in a field the first time, next time around the sheep will go in. After that, cattle again. And we just flip flop who goes in next. And some of those fields we do take hay off. Like we'll take a cut of hay off, and then we'll do the same rotation between the cattle and the sheep, whatever gets grazed afterwards. And it's sometimes that time frame varies depending on the weather, depending on whatever else is happening on the farm. But since we started doing the intergrazing of the cattle and the sheep, and we started focusing on that more, and I'm going to say it was 2013, 2014, really pushed it 2015, and have been doing it since. We've increased the productivity of those fields that we can do that on regularly. We're not far off saying that we're up 20 to 25% in production on those fields, just because of the cross section of grass species or forage species, I'll say, that are in those fields complements the grazing back and forth. So we get a lot more production out of those fields. The ground cover is a lot better. We're able to tolerate drier weather with those with that intergrazing because we have a better turf cover on those fields. And the real big plus for us, and which had the biggest push behind it in terms of doing this intergrazing, is that our issues with parasites in the sheep are way down. We used to have to regularly deworm our sheep in the summer months. Usually July and August were pretty tough on our sheep for parasite load. And starting this intergrazing, the cattle seem to clean up the sheep parasites really well to basically give us a bit more of a clean graze the next time the sheep are in those fields. And we're at the point now where we don't even need to deworm our sheep in the summers. It's worked out well. Even if we have a warm, wet summer, which is usually the recipe for higher parasite loads on those pastures, we get away with it. We don't have a lot of the morbidity that's associated with parasites. We don't have the mortality, again, the cattle don't seem to suffer by grazing in behind the sheep and cleaning up those parasites. So it's a long answer in terms of the timing of those when those livestock go into the fields, but we try to stick in that 28 to 30, 35 day window, just to make things work all on the farm.
So Mark, you have a grass-fed dairy designation, right? Does that mean that you graze your cattle more, or is it the system of what they're fed?
There are requirements for grass-fed. They have to have access so many hours a day to pasture. We're not utilizing it to the extent that I would like to, because in the previous barn with the tie stall, we were putting the cows out for pasture, bring them in, and that was a time of year that milk production or milk components were probably lower because of the grass compared to the forages that you feed in the wintertime, and the income may be down, but cost of producing that milk was well down. And it's amazing. I'm not going to cut into Adrian's presentation, but we do have a robotic barn, so we do have the data there instantaneously in front of us. So when the short period of time that we can utilize the optimum pasture that we do have under the minimum requirements, because that's where we are yet until we get some more fencing done, we can produce milk for around 8 cents a liter.
Wow.
But that's only for a short period of time. What we have found, though, because we are robotic, the cows, as soon as you open the gate, the cows do want to go out. They run out right away. You do not turn them out into a paddock 5 or 6 acres. You turn them into a small area and you creep it slowly every time, because what happens is they slug feed, and when they slug feed, it's just like you having your Christmas dinner. What do you want to do after that? Well, after lunch day, you probably wanted to have a nap, right? And the cows will do the same thing. They'll lay down outside, not come in and get milked, which affects your production. They'll also not come in and get the grain from the Cosmix feeders that are available for them to top off their daily ration that they don't get in the bunk or at the robot. So yeah, we do pasture. We're not there yet to where we want to be with it. It has a lot of potential for us to make cheaper milk, but we are meeting the minimum requirements. I won't lie to you. We are meeting the 6 hours. They have access for 6 hours a day, and at So 8 o'clock in the morning, we open the door, and they go out. Even though it's going to be a hot day, they'll go out for at least an hour or two, and then they'll come back in. And what we do is we put a one-way gate on, so that way they're not going to go back out at 7 o'clock when it's cooler. Because at that time, the pasture that we allotted them for the day is gone anyway. They've ate it, and we want them in the barn to produce milk.
Now, so you touched on a bit of this, and it's one of the things I want to talk about is when you're looking at your acres and you're estimating tonnage, how much are you thinking in, butterfat and milk, not necessarily in tons of dry matter per se? How do you figure that out on the production side? That's
Dustin's job.
Quick, text him.
Dustin is all over that. And the data is amazing that we can collect from the robot. It's instantaneous, like I said, it's there, and it's very useful right at that moment. We're not there with the pasture yet, but with the forages, and I can the simple answer is Dustin is on the right side of every provincial average for production or money, except one thing. And believe it or not, that's forage. We're not there yet. And that's partly my fault, and I'm going to put a bug in everybody's ear out there. 10 years ago, I did not have a succession plan. 10 years ago, I was looking at an exit strategy. So when you start looking at exit strategies, you start looking at cutting costs. And guess where I cut the cost? I cut cost on soil health. It's something that we're paying for today. We're trying to catch up. We're going to get there, but there's a cost to doing that. So my advice to you, at any point in time, don't ever think about jeopardizing what you need on your farm to produce, and that's your soil health.
We could start a whole other show.
I know we could.
Like right now. Okay. Any questions on that one? Please find them at the break. No, it's a really good point, though, in that, and we run a grass-based system as well. There aren't a lot of quick fixes. Right? Everything takes time because we're working in a biological system. You've got to feed that biological system and manage that biological system. So absolutely. Now, Markus, you did touch on some of the production changes or improvements that you've made over time. How do you sort of quantify what the benefits have been of instituting some of these management strategies?
Excuse me. Like I said, one of the all of my data or all of my information is anecdotal. I mean, there's no scientific research behind it, but those numbers are reflected in, for instance, us using less dewormers for our sheep. I mean, to me, those are real numbers that we have on our farm, and that is attributed to how we graze our fields. Another measure of how our fields or how our production scheme is functioning or performing is how long we are able to extend our grazing in the year. Before we started doing what we're doing currently in terms of the grazing, it was a rarity to have any of our livestock graze past, I'm going to say, October 31st, Halloween. There'd be the odd group or the odd year where we were early into November. Now we're consistently towards the end of November where we're grazing, even into December. The last 2 of the last 3 years we've been grazing well into middle of December. Not necessarily all the livestock, but a good number. The majority of the sheep and the cattle still grazing, foraging, like no stored feeds given to them in the field. And if there's snow, doesn't really matter. They will dig through it. They'll go for it if there's enough there under the snow. This past year specifically, one group of cattle we have about a third of our cows. They were grazing just up until Christmas, and this year was good too. I mean, they were starting to get down in terms of the amount of forage that was there. But we didn't have much snow, and they had no trouble at all digging through the snow that was there to get at the decreasing amount of forage that was out there. So I mean, yeah, there's no scientific numbers to validate what we're seeing on the farm, but to me those are real numbers. Those are real results that we're able to push that extended grazing out, and the volumes that we're getting off of pasturing, and even the stored feeds that we get off of those fields that are at the home farm that are looked after better. that all adds to our bottom line in terms of how much we're able to drive with revenue because we have that extra feed, or and in turn decreasing the cost of production. Because I mean that's what that extended grazing season does for us, is really drop that cost of production. There's no fuel involved with the tractor to get bales out to the livestock, and there's no scraping yards, wintering yards of manure. So there's a lot of benefits to pushing that extended grazing season out even more. And the beauty is with what we're doing, that extended grazing is all done with just forages. We could push that a lot further if we had, if we grazed, for instance, sorghum or something like that. Something that sticks through the snow better, that has more biomass to it. If there is a snow load, we could push that even further. One of the things that is a bit limiting with the extended grazing is if we get a lot of cold weather, that there's no either available snow or fresh water available. That does, that may hamper things or alter plans that we have to get water to the livestock. But for the most part, the extended grazing is by far the best way to go to reduce that cost of production and ultimately improve the bottom line of the farm business.
I don't know if everyone here realizes how incredible it is to keep cattle or sheep grazing to December, but it's a pretty big deal. It is not super common in the province. It's maybe more common out west, but generally speaking, it's not hugely common. And so any month that you can add at the end of the season is pretty remarkable in, as Markus said, bringing down those costs of production. So we're going to talk multi-species grazing and that in a bit. Same thing with, I'm glad you mentioned the sorghum. I want to talk a little bit about other ways that we could graze. But looking at grass-fed dairy, what have been some of the challenges that you've had to overcome in moving to a new system?
We were lucky because, as my son would say, quoting him, I'm a cheap kunkel. I was very adamant on using as much forage as possible to produce the milk that I needed to fill my bulk tank. So we were almost there with what we were feeding in the dry matter grain ratio to forage ratio, which is 85-15, I think is what it is. So the biggest problem was getting the right species of grass in the ground too, because our typical Timothy, one, does not like multiple cuts, and two, has uric acid or something in it, I forget what it is, that will affect the biomarkers in the milk that we produce. It is sort of it is a grass that is okay to use with grass-fed milk, but it affects the biomarkers that we get done, the tests that we get done every, I think quarterly or every 2 months. I'm not sure where we're at with that. And just for your information, the biomarker is the omega-3 to the omega-6 ratio, and how they get to that, I don't know, but 3 is the magic number, 3 and below. And if we think back of when I think they still have omega-3 eggs, but the omega milk did not really take off, and that was for 2 reasons. One, I think, might have been the marketing, and 2, producers were artificially setting their biomarkers by using other products to feed the cows. With our grass-fed milk program, we have to get the right grasses in the ground, and we have to get the right feed in front of them to try and do it as naturally as possible. And we've been successful the last 2 years. First 2 years were it was a learning curve. And we did use a little bit of flax seed, which was all right with the formula that we had. But when we moved into the robotic barn, we didn't have to. Our old nutritionist said this is beyond his capability, so we got a younger guy in the company to come in, and he sat down and he looked at everything that we could and couldn't put into our ration to keep our cows healthy and milking, and he turned to me and he says, "You're feeding cows what they're supposed to eat. We're not using M&Ms or sugar from Walmart." Like, you hear all kinds of stories of the States. We're not using brewer's grain. Now, some of the stuff I question why we can't use it, but it all reflects to what we get at the end of the day. But what we have found is Italian ryegrass has been the best grass so far for getting the production and getting the quality of forage we need. We've planted sorghum a couple times, successful the first time, not so successful the second time. But the Italian ryegrass last year, I don't know what tonnage it is. That's Dustin's department again. But I do know I cut the field 4 times. So
That's a lot.
Yep. So that's a lot for typically a Northern Ontario farm. But we are looking now at a different kind of sorghum that will meet the requirements. It's a male sterile sorghum that doesn't have any grains on it because we want less grains. If we do a green crop of oats and peas, we have to make sure we get it well before the milk stage. And the idea of this sorghum is with no seeds on it, there's no grain component to it, and it puts more energy in the stalk. The only thing that scares me, though, is that stalk is going to, or that plant's going to be 6 to 8 feet tall. And we're only doing 2 or 3 acres because I don't know how much of a headache this is going to be.
It sounds like.
But it's going to be a trial run this year, and if it works, then we're going to probably looking at investing at the proper equipment to get it off. We're probably just going to beg, borrow, and steal neighbors' equipment this year, but with something that we can look at because we're always looking at volume per tonnage per acre, and this sorghum, from the research that Dustin has done, is very comparable to corn in the volume and in the energy level. And I think it's 2/3 of the volume of corn, which means it's 2/3 more than grass. You know.
And is it cheaper seed?
No.
That would have been the trifecta.
We only need a half a bag to do what we're going to do, and
there you go.
that's $250.
Yeah, seed's expensive. Rather cheekily, and if anybody has ever followed along on any of things that I do, you know that I don't like Timothy. How'd you get rid of it? Because I feel like it's like a weed.
Oh no, it's
basically.
still there.
Yeah. Okay.
It's still there.
Just checking.
But we have so the first the first field that we experimented on, we cut the first cut of hay off it. We burnt it down with Roundup. We overseeded it with sorghum. Got a reasonable first cut, an amazing second cut. And the third cut was astonishing, except it kept raining.
Yeah.
So that was a nightmare. So that's why I'm not looking forward to the 6 and 8 foot stuff, because the 4 and 5 foot stuff was terrible to work with. But then we direct seeded, because that's only a 1 year thing with sorghum. And then we direct seeded with orchard grass and ryegrass, and that field is on its 4th year now, I think.
Okay. Yep.
It's orchard and ryegrass now. So
sorghum's 1 year. Yeah.
So what's nice with it, the root mass will open the soil up enough so when you go across with the overseeder the next time, there's more ground contact for the seed. So.
See, if I had a hat, I'd give it to you. See, interrupt everybody. We all learn that way. All right. Although I have a question for you, Markus, how you then rejuvenate pastures before I ask you this question. But yeah, so if we're getting rid of the dreaded Timothy, okay, maybe that's not your goal, it's mine. But how do you rejuvenate pastures, or do you need to with the system you're running?
The short answer is no, we don't really rejuvenate pastures. We do a bit of frost seeding the odd time just to get some legume content in. But some of the pastures that we have in place, pastures / hay fields, they have been there, since my dad last cropped it or did something to it. Some of those fields are 40 to 50 years old, and they haven't been touched. I did plow one of those fields last fall. We had it tiled, so I did plow it, and the top 4 inches of that soil of that field, that soil were just amazing. And to the point about Timothy. Because Timothy doesn't do well, with multiple cuts, with heavy or intensive grazing, we still have Timothy in our fields for sure, but though Timothy has been slowly replaced by the grasses that do work, like orchard grass comes through really well. We've got some fairly low-lying fields, so we've got a lot of reed canary in some areas, and those grasses are all they certainly have more of a presence now than what Timothy does. And Timothy, reseeding a field, Timothy is cheap, but there's a reason for that. It's not an ideal grass. But yeah, anyways, just on that point of the Timothy, we don't have a whole lot left there. The fields that do have a lot of Timothy are fields that we rent, that we only run the cattle on, which in turn again is fields that we rent that are not close to home. And these are fields that have had nothing done to them or very little done to them for many, many years. Some of the land that we rent, you can call it mining the soil. A lot of the fields we don't have long-term releases on, so we don't really try to improve those fields or improve the soil health. One farm, the last farm purchase that we made, we rented that farm for, I believe it was 10 years before we bought it. And before that, it had been cropped, it had hay taken off. And I was speaking to someone that used to, he was a hired man for the farmer that owned it, I think 2 times before us. And he figured that the last time it had seen any kind of manure or any kind of, call it soil amendment, any kind of improvement it was anywhere from 25 to 30 years. And that field, or those fields, that farm in general, when we purchased it, it was very tired. And like Mark was saying earlier, you pay for it in the long run if you let things go in terms of the soil health and the soil quality. And when we purchased that farm, and that was back in 2017, we've been feeding cattle on there every winter to build the soils back up. We haven't plowed any of that aftermath down from the bale grazing, and that farm is actually at a point now where it's responded very, very well to I guess the passive improvements that we've done, because again we don't seed anything down, and everything that we have on that farm now I shouldn't say everything, but mostly everything that we have in terms of that farm in terms of forage is everything that came out of that hay, because it was poorer mature hay that we fed there, and so there was a lot of seed bank in there. That has all come through now, and it's working out quite well. There's a lot of trefoil that's come through. There's some red clover, white clover. There's orchard grass. There's ryegrass, and the species that work best for you in terms of forages, they will propagate and proliferate and leave the other ones behind that you don't want or that don't perform for you.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that we can all agree Timothy sucks. Okay, anyway, because really that's what it's about, right? Markus, you sent this slide, and I love this picture. And with the quote, often the simplest solution is the best solution, first cost is the least cost. What do you mean by that? So
simplest, to me, that is simplicity. So the first cost and least cost, that goes in hand in hand, at least with this photo and a lot of things we do. It goes hand in hand with the first cost, least cost goes hand in hand with simplicity, because this is the absolute easiest way to reduce that cost of production is get those sheep out there grazing whatever's available in the fall and extend that fall grazing. And you can see in the very background of this photo, the cows are in behind this field where the sheep are.
Over there.
And then so the first cost, least cost comment comes in, the far boundary and the near boundary of that field that the sheep are grazing in is a high tensile fence. And to me, if you don't have good fencing for pasturing, then that's where that first cost, least cost thing goes out the window. Because if you don't have that good fencing in right away, then you don't have options to do whatever you need to do with those livestock. Mm-hmm. And so what we have on our farm is we have all of our fields at the home farm are either the boundaries of the fields or are subdivided with multi-strand high tensile fences, and then left and right of the sheep is just a temporary polywire fence that we put up for them. And to me, it's like I said earlier, it's super simple to do that. The cost is low of the actual capital investment to do that. It takes a little bit of planning, takes some patience as well to plan properly. And if something's simple, if something works, there's no. I mean, you want to be in a position that you tweak things. But if something works for you, I don't think you should go along and say, you know what, I'm going to abandon this completely and do something completely different and see how it goes. I don't think anybody is in a position to, just to change something like that, because if you fall flat on your face with that idea, it's going to cost you dearly, and it's probably going to cost you dearly for the long term as well. So if something's simple, keep doing it, but don't be afraid to tweak it. And if you keep tweaking things, you might get to something that works really well for you, as opposed to works okay for you. But that's just simple as the best. It really is. It keeps your life easy, keeps costs down, and just makes things work really well.
Do you move them from here? Like, do you just move the
So,
fence and keep moving them down?
In this photo here, we move them from right to left, and then the next move would be to the left. So that's the front fence now that's leading them
Yeah.
will be their back fence. So they
Yep.
won't. I mean, in the fall grazing, it's not so important that they graze back. But in the summer months, when we're trying to get those pastures to come back as quickly as possible, we always run a back fence. We do not want the livestock going back and grazing what they already grazed, 2 to 3 days prior, because that'll just set the grasses or the forages back too far. Yeah, and this is it's a rough photo of how we have improved our soil health on different farms or different fields that have been pretty tired over the years, and we literally just bale graze. It's modified bale grazing, not typically what you'd see out in the west, where they set out the bales and then just work their way through over the winter. But I set bales out every 2-3 days and just keep on putting them in different spots. And the following year, the field it will not produce very well. It'll look pretty poor. It'll look really crappy actually with where the bales were and where the livestock concentrated. But that second year is awesome. It looks really well. Looks really good. The field performs really well. You can, if you went through and you cropped it, you'd have fantastic crops. But this is, to me, this is simplicity. You don't have any manure management this way, other than making sure you move those bales around every time you field to spread out that residue that's left over and spread any of the manure that the livestock produce.
Mark, how does wintering look different in a grass-based system? Because they still have to have access to outside all year, or just during the grazing season?
No, just during the grazing seasons.
Okay. But you don't want to do this? Imagine. He's not a sheep farmer, guys.
No, but actually, just for interest's sake, 40 years ago, our cows were outside every day.
Yep.
When we were milking 28 cows, they went outside to see who was hot and who was not, was the first thing, right?
Yeah.
And got their daily exercise. When we got up to 54 cows, milking cows, then it became too big of a chore, and then we looked at comfort stalls and did all that thing there. But and that's what's unique about the new barn. Our new barn is a compost pack barn where cows have access to a shit pile.
Yes.
You know,
a bedding pack.
The bedding pack. No, it's
Yes.
not a bedding pack. It's a compost.
Just, yeah. And it
So
creates heat, right?
It creates heat.
Yeah.
Our barn is only curtains on the side. Now, this winter's been exceptional, but last winter when we had minus 30, 2 degrees in the barn.
Yeah.
And so the cows are just like they're on pasture. They walk on hard surface, they walk on soft surface. So,
Have you found with the robot and with the bedding system or the pack system a change in what foot issues you have? Has it improved some and made some worse, or overall has it been beneficial?
overall, it's been beneficial.
Yeah. Can you repeat the question just so everybody else can?
I'll do it, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
The question was asked if I've looked at irrigation, mechanical irrigation, and yes. Well, no. So what we're looking at is, with the compost pack, we don't have a huge liquid storage facility. We don't need one, but we still have liquid. So if we ever have to update our manure system, we would probably go irrigation, and then irrigation from our whole farm is on the South River, so we have access to water. I don't know what the permutation would be, but for permits, I mean. But at the end of the day, no, the option's there, and we've looked into it. Trust me. Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You would have more control and get the growth when you want it.
Mm-hmm. With how many years have you had the robots in place, Mark?
3 years now.
Okay, yeah. And have you so one of the sometimes questions about the pack barn is the mastitis potential. How have you managed that risk?
I wish I'd have sent you a picture. We got a gold certificate this year.
Good job. Look at you go.
Yeah,
No, that's
I
good.
didn't say we. My son did.
Right. Yeah. Who should be here, maybe? I don't know. Okay, so that hasn't been an issue, or was it something you managed for?
No, my son's a university graduate from geography, environmental geography, whatever. He worked in the mines, and he worked with septic systems, tailing ponds. So he had all the science behind him. And when we started the compost pack, he takes samples of it, has a temperature thermometer, takes the temperature. Not now, but he did the first 6 months to a year. And now he can look at it. And
he knows.
And if his brother was here, who was a OMAFRA expert on this, just add more sawdust.
That's right. More carbon. Put more carbon in there.
More carbon,
yeah, that's right. That's actually how I found Markus. I know Christoph quite well, and I just looked for whoever looked like Christoph, and then I found Markus. Markus and I had never met before, so there you go.
And you look up to him, don't you?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, okay. All right, we're rounding out our time here, so more questions, welcome. Absolutely, shout them out, stand up, put your hand up, whatever the case may be. I couldn't help it. If we're going to talk grazing, I'm going to throw my slide in here, so these are my sheep, on a 200-acre solar site. One of the other things that we do, and Markus, I wanted to ask you about this as well, is so once our sheep start at a solar site in April or May, and usually October they're coming off, and we bring them to cover crops, or sometimes it's an old forage stand that somebody's going to take out. So we're trying to extend our grazing season through things like that. Obviously, with a shorter season, cover crops can be more of a challenge. But what are you seeing? Opportunities for aftermath grazing or anything like that?
So you mean like cover crops on rented, like for instance a cash cropper in your area?
Yeah.
Then?
Yeah. So yeah, what's usually happening for us is after the wheat comes off, they're putting in a cover crop, and then we go in like October, November, and graze it off. Yeah.
On our farm, we do pretty much zero cash cropping. The odd time, or I would like to get into producing more barley for our feedlot needs. But immediately in our area, there are no cash croppers that we could do that with.
You lucky duck.
So yeah, I mean that's the simple answer in terms of cover crops on that kind of that land. We don't have that opportunity.
What about? Do you have any have you ever grazed corn, or is it sorghum if you're going to choose something like that?
Well, we've never grazed corn. Again, we have no one around us that we could easily run our livestock to that we could graze corn or graze corn stubble. We have grazed sorghum. We had sorghum put into a field. It was at the last farm purchase that we made, and we had our cattle on it. We took a cut of sorghum off for stored feed, and then we grazed whatever grew back. I think we grazed it well into November, and the cattle did really well. It took a little time for them to get onto the sorghum, and it was really wet. And when they first got into that field, so they were pretty apprehensive to kind of get into it. But as soon as things dried off and we got some frost, and they weren't just punching it up and making it all muddy, they got onto it really well, and it worked very well.
Very cool. Okay. We're going to wrap up on this topic because I think this is incredibly important, and we've talked about this somewhat. We got a bit of a report earlier today about access to veterinary medicine, and both of you, this was something that was really important to both of your operations and the importance of it for your farms. So Mark, we'll start with you. When you're going through a production year, what sorts of experts are you leaning on, and how important are they to your business?
Everyone we can. We're back into taking soil samples at least every 2 years, if not every year. The agronomist that we have, he's only made one visit, and he was really keen on our compost pack, how it would work, and he educated us on how the potential we had with it. But our biggest one is the nutritionist for animal health and milk production. So we really focus a lot on that right now, and it's really paying dividends. The cows since we moved into the barn, they had nowhere to go but up. Trust me, they were only at 25, 28 liters per day. Now we capped at 39 last week, but probably go back down to 34 or 35 average. Because it depends on days of milk. But the vet comes in every 4 weeks, reproductive work, herd health, vaccination, all that. The feed specialist was, when we first moved into the barn, it was every Friday. There was a conference call. Now it's maybe every 2 or 3 months. We haven't gone away from taking forage samples, but we deterred as much as possible because of the spoilage we had. With our 10-foot bags, it was very hard to seal that bag up and not get, 200 or 300 kilograms of spoilage right around that spot. So what we typically do now is if we feel we need to balance our ration because there's something going on health-wise, whether it's the manure score or the milk production, we will take a sample from the bag that we're in, that's already open, and send it off and try and get a rush on it and then work with the nutritionist in. But he's flowing along pretty good now. He doesn't need to do the once a week or the once a month thing, but make sure you have those contacts and make sure they're there when you need them, because you never know well, my son always says to me, he says, when you have livestock, they have all day to ruin your day.
It's a good point. They seem to do it when it's the least conducive to actually getting a vet out, or whatever the case may be. Markus, what about you?
Quite honestly, we don't use, we don't have a feed specialist per se that we consistently use. But we do, we do feed samples, we do soil samples, and I think the biggest thing is that, like Mark just said, you want to have those contacts available. Like, if there's some kind of cropping issue or forage, a field issue, let's call it. Like, I have contacts that I can pick up the phone and, I can contact those people. And just or even if it's just bouncing ideas off them, or even like I have a group text going with a couple other sheep farmers that every once in a while we just we'll shoot each other a text, we'll send a video of what's going on the farm, good or bad or whatever, just to get some thoughts back, bounce things off of people, and coming back to like the soil samples, for instance. Trust the soil samples. Like if the numbers come back whatever way they come back, there's really no room for interpretation. Like there's not a gut feeling there that, this test is wrong. Like the numbers don't lie. And I think people need to also trust a lot in what their own, in their own experience. If you've gone through something before, whether it be with the livestock or with the cropping, if you think something's coming back, whether it be good or bad, I think you also have to trust yourself, not just this is happening, let's go run to whatever. It's not bad to do that, but I think again just bouncing ideas off of other people but trusting the numbers, trusting if a feed specialist tells you this to correct, let's say I'll pick on like a coccidiosis problem, like trust those things. Or trust those people, not just go by gut instincts. Gut instincts are good, don't get me wrong. But you can't throw the numbers or good advice, you can't just dismiss it.
So,
go ahead, Mark.
So one thing I always say, you can't afford to do it, but you can't afford not to do it.
Mm-hmm. What about with vets? Do both of you have good working relationship with vets? Is it a challenge for either of you to access veterinary care?
No, we're lucky for now. Mm-hmm. Very lucky.
Yep.
Actually, Kunkel's and ourselves, we use the exact same vet out of Sturgeon Falls. Super accessible, does a really good job. I certainly don't have the vet out our place as often as what Mark does. But yeah, we have a great working relationship, and that goes a long way for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to wrap up because we're running out of time, although I think we're almost on time, so we sped things up a little bit. This is a quote that I wanted to share, and it's not from me. I heard it on the radio one day, and I was not paying attention, so I have no idea who said it, but I liked it, so I kept it. And so one of the things that I always challenge in any of the talks I give or anything like that is, like these gentlemen have shared today, is the trying something different. Don't necessarily check everything and start all new in 1 year. That's really risky. But trying something new can be pretty cool, and introducing it over time on your farm. But that's how we learn. Sometimes lessons are expensive, especially with sheep. Well, livestock in general, I think, are rather expensive. So I'll leave you with that one. All right. We're going to take some questions. This QR code will take you to the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. So this show, like we did here tonight, I'm going to host it again. Tonight we're talking about wheat midge. You guys won't care about that one. But if you want to check it out on YouTube, that'll take you to our channel. You can click live, and on 8 p.m. on Mondays, there it is. And if you want to follow me on social media, that's my handle, RealAg and that's my email. I don't put my phone number because I don't answer my phone. I think it's weird. Anyway, you can text me, but you can't phone me. Okay. I also have a rule, no matter where I present, no matter who I share the stage with, no one leaves until we get a good question. And we've had a couple. But what questions do you have? We need at least one good one, or I'm not letting anybody go. Oh, down in front. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
So you mentioned that you went to Switzerland to do some testing or some trials. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So I was wondering whether, being myself half Swiss, I haven't been surrounded by cows my entire life there. I was wondering whether there's something that the Swiss do very much differently than North American or Canadian in general when it comes to cattle, particularly cows, of course.
So what do the Swiss do different, specifically, that versus North Americans with cattle, with their dairy cows?
Was this a good question?
Yes, that's a good question.
Yeah. That's a good- They treat them like kings and queens for starters. They really look after them. They sing. They have bells on too. So
Yes.
our neighbors are from Switzerland. They've been in Canada for 30 years. Tony and Yvonne took us over there. We stayed in their family house, like the original family homestead, which had the stable and everything right there. Church across the street, restaurant across the street, a horse barn right there with horses, a manure pile steaming in the morning, whatever. So it was really quite the experience. The farms that we visited, right from, so Tony, when he lived there, actually milked cows in the mountain and made cheese up there.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing we didn't get to do, but we did see a lot of other farms. Him and I wanted to climb the mountain, which was a whole day excursion and come back down. But anyway, so over there, and there's a lot of family and a lot of cooperation that goes on over there that I've seen. That there's competition or competitiveness, but not the same as what we see here. They're not as corporate-minded thinking as we are here. They're more farm or family-oriented and more like the village. So Tony's family farm is still running. His youngest brother has it. Milks 15 cows with a 3-stall parlor. This cow's in heat. I'll phone the vet. The township will pay the vet to breed the cow. There's all kinds of stuff that just blows my mind of what they're doing over there to maintain that style of life, right? But at the same time, that's where I seen my first robot too. You know, so typically every farm over there that has 30, 40 cows has a robot now. So I got to tell you the story. So we walked from the restaurant. We're sitting at the restaurant. We watched this guy chase his 8 cows into the barn to milk them. We ate our dinner. We walked past his farm from here to the wall to the next barn, which had the robotic barn. They're building a house for the son that's coming home to milk cows. The house is that far away from mom and dad's. I turned to my wife and I said, "You thought you lived too close to your mother-in-law." Things are really intensified there in the sense that, now things have changed a lot too when I've talked to Tony and Yvonne over there, but because the population growth has really come up in Switzerland from the size of the country, right? So they're really, there's a lot of regulations, but they're still maintaining those small farms there, which is amazing, I think.
We actually had someone who is also Swiss, but their family had come here and she went back. When they milk up the mountain, they actually send the milk back down, just using gravity, down to the bay. Were you at one of those where they have like a mobile parlor that moves up the mountain, and then the milk comes down and they make cheese at like the base of the mountain?
Where Tony was, there was 4 of them up there milking whatever their cows. The helicopter come in once a week.
Oh my gosh, a helicopter. Okay, there was a question at the back here. Yep.
Yeah. Both of you talked about soil testing and maximizing production out of the land that you have. Do you top dress extensively with chemical fertilizer or use
Great question.
chemicals in order to enhance, kickstart your system?
Depends on where. For instance, our home farm, where there's certainly more care, or has been more care given to, call it to the soils in general. We use very little fertilizer at home, to basically none. I mean, we have the ability and the volume there to apply manure to those fields as well. On rented ground, depends on the agreement that we have with the landlord. We do use chemical fertilizers a fair bit to get enough production out of those fields. But some of those, for instance, some of those agreements that we have, they're year to year, and and some of them we pay per bale from what we take off. So for us, it doesn't make sense to put anything into those at all, because we're just, we're basically paying for it twice, putting the fertilizer on and then paying the landlord for the hay that we're paying to produce. Some of the actually our most recent farm purchase, the last I think it was 4 years now, we've been trucking manure from our home farm out there just to bump up that soil health out there with the manure. And another farm that's actually not too far from our home farm now, that I have a long-term agreement with, where we've moved manure out there too. So we try to minimize the amount of chemical fertilizers, especially on, and again, it depends on the agreement, but if depending on what that soil needs, it won't pay to put that fertilizer on. For instance, if the pH is too high on it, we're not going to get the performance or the response out of the fertilizer that we need to justify that cost, especially the last couple of years, how fertilizer prices were. So really, it depends on where we are on the farm in terms of what we do in terms of chemical fertilizer. So it's a complicated answer, I guess. Thanks, Garth.
So I don't call it chemical fertilizer. I call it commercial fertilizer, because it's a nutrient. It's mined. It's not a chemical in a sense, in my mind. That's how we look at it. But we're the same way as Markus. The farthest farms away from our home farm, where the barn is, where the manure is, there's where we concentrate on using the soil samples to balance what we need with commercial fertilizer. Because if we don't, then why do we have it? Now, we have looked at plowing down a crop. Instead of taking the second cut of hay off, we'll leave it and we'll plow it down to help break up the soil in that there. And that seems to have helped to get some green manure back into there from the natural grass that grows there. But as a rule, yeah, it's the same as I think pretty every farm is the same way. The home farm is pretty well taken care of with the manure, and then the ones are off to the rentals and all that are sort of neglected if you don't look after them with commercial fertilizer.
We all need more brown gold. Markus, for the pastures that you've had long term, that you've soil sampled, has the pH come up, or do you still struggle with a lower pH on some of those?
Depends on the field. Actually, a lot of those older stands, we haven't sampled those. We've been concentrating our soil sampling more on those. Again, on that most recent farm purchase, where the soils were pretty tired, and it is fairly variable too within that farm. Like, it's a 200-acre farm. I think there's about 120 acres workable on it. So it's very variable too in those 120 acres that how the forages perform there. To be honest, the home farm, we haven't really sampled a whole lot, which we really need to get into. But that aside, like even without the soil sampling, those fields really do perform very, very well. Like, we've got such little expense into those fields that are 40 years old in terms of the forage that's on them. Like, it's almost a shame. It's almost you shouldn't even touch them. Like, to break them up or to do something with them, because they're just in a good natural state and performing well. But yeah, so it's the farms that we're trying to bring back and bring that soil fertility up that we test.
All right, I think that's it. We're getting the old crook across the neck. Please join me in thanking my guests for joining me here today. All right, and thank you so much, everyone.